So, can we talk about masks? Hey everyone, my name is Christopher Balkrin. I am the host of the Open Minds podcast, where I'm attempting to explore the biggest topics with genuine curiosity. Definitely like, share, subscribe, link in the description below to my podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Let me just preface this video by saying I am not an anti vaxxer, an anti masker. I am not some conspiracy theorist. I am not, this person who hates the government. I'm just trying to ask the questions that are necessary for our public square. I'm also trying to attempt to understand precisely why governments do what they do. And when there's not enough evidence for something, why are we continuing down that path? So when COVID hit, we didn't have a vaccine and the government mandated masks. And I understood the logic, right? This was a respiratory illness. It was spreading through droplets. This was necessary before we received a vaccine. I got it. It made logical sense to me why masks were being enacted. And then they were being mandated. Again, I kind of understood based on that kind of early research on COVID that there was this respiratory illness and we needed masks to stop it. But as COVID went on, more and more research started coming out questioning whether or not masks were actually effective or not. And to me, this started this rift in how we understand government decree. Because sometimes we think government must act on some evidence. They must. I mean, you're talking about a government in Canada's case that oversees 39, 40 million people. It must act on evidence from top scientists and medical professionals to mandate something for all of us to adhere to. It's the first time I've ever lived in Canada where they mandated an article of clothing. So I thought, okay, well, there must be a lot of evidence for this. It makes sense for me to believe the government in this case. But there wasn't enough evidence. In fact, according to the government's website, they said masks are one of the most effective individual public health measures that we can use to protect ourselves and others from COVID 19. When layered with other public health measures and a well fitting, properly worn mask, it can help prevent you from getting COVID, spreading COVID. And there's going to be situations in the future where we may need to rely on masking, outbreaks, new variants, high level of COVID. Clearly, if you just read the government's website and information, you think, okay, this makes sense. Like, it's a respiratory illness. This stops the droplets physically. I get it. It makes sense. That's why I see doctors wear masks. It makes total sense. But research has come out, and I'm not going to go through all the research because I feel like there's a lot there. There was one study out of the Cochrane Library that was cited by Forbes and others that shows there is an uncertainty about the effects of masks. The low to moderate certainty of evidence means our confidence in the effect estimate is limited, and that the true effect may be different from the observed estimate of the effect. The pooled results of randomly controlled trials does not show a clear reduction in respiratory viral infection with the use of medical surgical masks. Now, I must be clear, this research is not saying masks are not effective or that they don't work. The research is basically saying there's uncertainty about the effects of face masks. Uncertainty about the effects of face masks is a much different sentence than the government's masks are one of the most effective individual public health measures that we can use to protect ourselves and others. Those are two different statements, right? So to me, okay, so why couldn't the government just say, we don't know the full impact of COVID 19. We do know it's a respiratory illness. We assume then that masks will prevent respiratory droplets from spreading person to person. So we're strongly encouraging the use of masks. You see, strongly encouraging, those two words versus mandate are very different. They convey very different tonality and they obviously suggest totally different actions. Strongly encouraged to me provides the government with this gray area, right? To let people know that, hey, we're working through this too. This is brand new and we don't know exactly what the effects of COVID are. So we're going to just strongly encourage that you do wear a mask. Now, of course, a lot of people probably wouldn't wear a mask with that language and lexicon. But to me, it would show that humility, to show that, hey, We don't get it. Research is still coming out, but we believe this is the best way forward based on the evidence that based on what some medical practitioners are telling us, right? Again, I would give the government the benefit of the doubt if they said something like that. But they mandated masks. So there was this idea that masks were effective and it was absolutely necessary. But, it's not just the Cochrane study. There's others that show that, again, we just don't know about these physical interventions to reduce or interrupt the spread of respiratory viruses. We just don't have enough random controlled trials. There needs to be, in fact, this study actually ends with saying there is a need for large, well designed, random controlled trials to address the effectiveness of many of these interventions in multiple settings and populations. Now, okay, again, if the government just said, we haven't studied this enough, but we're going to start funding like a massive random control trial with other countries, and we're going to kind of figure this out, and we're hoping that we'll have some evidence for this. Um, but they mandated it. And I think that's where you get people who get very distrustful from government. You see, when government mandates things, again, it means that they're relying on heavy evidence. And clearly there wasn't any evidence. And yet this mandate was enacted. And it was very strongly enacted. You would get fined. I don't know if anyone got sent to jail, but you would definitely get fined and kicked out of public spaces. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the point of all of this? Like, who cares? It's just a fringe minority who would actually engage in that type of behavior. Regardless of what you think about those who don't wear masks during COVID-19, the fact that it was mandated without any evidence fla- fans the flames of people who are already very distrustful of government. And again, you might be thinking, like, who cares? You should care because those individuals are very vocal about their mistrust and distrust of government. And there are more and more ways to spread false narratives, etc., distrust of government than ever before. So to me, we can label people and say they're whatever, but the onus here is on government as well. Government has to act with more humility, in my opinion, than it has to on certainty. And again, this is just me, uh, backseat quarterback kind of thing. I'm not the government, I'm not the prime minister, but I do believe in humility when you don't know and you don't have enough evidence and the weight of the world is on your shoulders, right? Like I don't understand what it would have been like being the premier or prime minister when your IC ICU wards are filling up and a lot of people are passing away and you feel like you need to do something. I can't imagine the stress that these individuals were under. Um and the expectation of people to, demand them to do things. But when it comes to mandating things, I would have given the government such a benefit of the doubt if they just came out saying, we just don't know. But I just would encourage people to please wear masks because we think this is the best way and we won't fully know until the research comes out. But this is what the the medical research is showing. But then also say, listen, I don't know, so I'm not going to mandate it, right? I don't know, so I'm not going to mandate it. I think that would have probably been a more middle of the road way. Um, and maybe it would have prevented people from being so anti-government as well and staging like massive protests. Maybe people would have given the government the benefit of the doubt. Maybe people would have said like, oh, like they're actually admitting that they just don't know. I think that would have been the best. And now we're finding out that, more research is coming out about the impacts masks are having on our environment, which is a whole other thing. That's one of the challenges when we're talking about this mask discussion. Vaclav Smil wrote this really good book. I think it's called Energy and Civilization, or is it Grand Transitions? One of the two. But basically, whenever we undertake something brand new into our environment, in this case, masks, it's very easy for our minds to make up the positive impact of that, right? Like you put on a mask and you're preventing yourself and others from getting this virus, or at least you're trying to slow down the spread. Regardless of the evidence of or not, there's this new intervention and it makes you feel safe or it makes you feel like you're doing something. And it's easy to get caught up in the positive impact of that intervention. But then there's the downside of that. It's one, we don't know if it's actually effective or not. That's the most important downside. But the second, and perhaps one that we should study more, is the impact of hundreds of millions, billions of people wearing these one-time use face masks and then throwing them away into the garbage or into our environment. And again, research is coming out about the processing of these microfibers into marine environments and other environments as well, and what's happening. So we have to also think about this again in this environment of climate change discussion and how important that is. And then also, I think associated with this is we have to think like this was a physical intervention by government on all of us, and it was mandated. And when mandates are enacted without evidence, that to me is a bit scary because the government could enact other mandates that, you know, we may see only the positives and the government won't talk about the negatives, right? And so we have to be able to ask these very tough questions about masks and about other things. And we have to be able to find the space to debate and discuss them. So if my podcast or if my YouTube channel is that place, I welcome it. I think that is really robust for our democracy and for our public discourse. And I think that we need to really, really protect that space because we can't allow government, social media, influencers, etc., dictate what government's doing or what they're not doing. We have to be able to have that interplay to develop a better understanding on the way forward. Plato in ancient Greek, I'm just going to end with this. In ancient Greek, there was this talk of everyone should have their voice, and then some people should speak loudly. And then there were like the wise elders, those people who were able to rationally look at a situation and comment on it. And the only way that wise elder got to their spot is through having their voice, going through a period of understanding and experience, and then speaking based on that understanding and experience. And often I'm finding that everybody has their voice, but they're jumping to that ability to speak on what government should do instead of going through the understanding phase. Right? So if you're going to advocate for mask mandates, let's have an honest discussion on whether or not the evidence shows that it works and that it's effective. If you're going to advocate that masks are not effective at all and we should never use it, let's have that discussion as well, where we talk about what the research shows about the efficacy of masks. So I think we really need to protect that understanding space, and I'm happy to continue doing that. So let me know what you think of this video. Share your comments, like, subscribe, share. I'm going to share more of my ideas and my thinking because I feel like we need more of this in our space today. Thank you so much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.